Sarah's joined us today to discuss her career, her projects, and her influences. Sarah, hi, welcome to your first Speakers for Schools virtual talk.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So yes, as was just said, I'm going to answer questions, but we thought it would be good to kick off with seeing the trailer of the latest film that I've directed called Rocks. Just before we play it, just to give you a bit of context, it's about teenage girls growing up in London, and we made it as a creative collaboration between the teenagers themselves who are in the cast and the creative team. So really, as a director here, I was more of a facilitator. It's going to open later this year, but we've had to delay it because of lockdown. And later on, I can talk a bit about how lockdown and also how the political situation at the moment has made me re-examine, and all the film and television industry re-examine, what kind of stories we should be telling and who should be telling them. And I think it's more important than ever that that the film industry opens itself up to stories that we haven't heard before from probably people like you, who are the next generation of filmmakers. So we'll show the trailer and then I'll answer the questions. Thanks.
Yo, smell! I'ma get my own back and keep
Are y'all seeing this? I'm gonna be the new Picasso.
These are your clients?
Yeah,
I'm gonna be a millionaire.
Put your pesky hands back and pay the money for it.
How's your mum doing?
Yeah, she's fine.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm not here right now, so if you'd like to leave a message.
You did the right thing by calling us, yeah, that's...
Come on, let's go.
Surely I did not go through all of this for nothing.
I think you should tell someone about your mum. It's just you and Emmanuel. And...
You wouldn't understand.
What's the problem? Talk to me. I
don't
get
need you
it.
to worry for me.
You're nothing, such a beautiful world.
You have to leave now. Get out, get out!
Cause nothing can be loved into something.
There's got to be a way to sort all this. You just can't keep going on by yourself.
Now we move forward together.
I've got £5.
I have 20.
Yeah, I see the queen's shining.
Rocks, man.
Welcome to the future.
Wait, where's your tickets?
Close your eyes. Think of everything that is happy. And stop thinking about all your worries.
We're coming with you.
I want chicken wings today. I'm actually sick of time. How you guys wanting chicken like I'm so sick?
Of course, the film wasn't released on April 10th, so hopefully there'll be a new release date in the future, just in case the audience have any questions. So Sarah, it'd be really interesting to understand why the creative arts are important to you.
Well, so I think the creative arts are really vital. I mean, you know, they're a way of expressing yourself. And it's very important in this time that we understand the world. I was thinking about it because I saw on BBC iPlayer the other day a drama about the Windrush scandal, you know, where people were sent deported, even though they'd been living here for years and years. And the government acknowledged it was a big mistake, but it took its toll on the people involved. And I'd read lots of articles about that scandal. But then I watched the drama, and there was something about seeing close up a family and understanding what it meant for that man to be put in detention and have his job taken away when he'd lived here all his life, and how shocking that was. And the fact that it was dramatized made more of an impact on me. So I think that, you know, film and television and theatre and the arts are a way into stories. They're a way in for us to understand the world. That's really, really vital, particularly at moments like this, where you've got what's going on in America and here in terms of racism. It's more vital than ever, I'd say.
Absolutely. And is there any advice that you would give to young people who are interested in going into the creative industries or into film in particular?
Yeah, well, the things I've learned along the way are, one, that you have to keep going and never take no for an answer, because you'll get a lot of, you know, a lot of no's and a lot of closed doors, and that's just standard. And you've got to go, okay, I'm not going to be put off by that. Two is that you know, it can be a bit intimidating to access these areas because you might not know where to go to or who to talk to. But there are now lots of different resources. Into Film, who are partnering on this, have a website which I know they're going to share with you, where they help young people wanting to get into the creative industries. There are lots of resources online. There's no set way to get into film. If you have a degree, it's great, but if you don't have a degree, it also doesn't matter. You know, that you don't have to have a particular career path, or you don't have to have certain GCSEs. You just have to have a passion and a commitment, and, you know, if depending on what area of film you want to go into. So my route in was that I didn't know when I was at school. I had no idea what the jobs were on film. And I didn't have anyone who worked in the film industry around me. I don't think I even knew what a director was, partly because there weren't any women directors I knew of. So, you know, that old phrase, you have to see it to be it. I think it's so true that if you see someone out there doing something, you think, oh, maybe I could do it. And if they are a bit like you think, oh, even more so, maybe I could do it. So it wasn't until my late teens, early 20s, when I started to see films by women directors, that I started to think, oh my goodness, maybe this is why I'm so interested in drama and I'm interested in art at school. Those were my two passions. And this suddenly, it got exciting. So I applied for a film course, and on that course I made some short films, and I learned through doing it, really. Now, I know that film courses now some of them have become expensive, some less so, and there are some bursaries, but you can, in a way that you couldn't when I was younger, you can now make films, as we all know, on your iPhone. So I do think that's a brilliant way to explore it and get together with a group of friends. I'd also suggest learning all the time. I mean, I still see myself, I see like I'm in lifelong education. So I watch films, I research who's made them, I look on the site IMDb and look at who composed the music, who directed it, who produced it, and then I do a bit of research about them, and then I look at their other work, and then I read books about how filmmaking happens, and then I listen to talks on the BAFTA website, or I go to the BFI, the British Film Institute website, and listen to talks, because all the time you can learn about different ways of doing things, different techniques. But I also, I think it's really important to just follow life. And as we know, filmmaking isn't just directing. I mean, I'm talking about filmmaking because that's my area, but you know, filmmaking isn't just directing. You can be a camera person, you can be a makeup artist if you're interested in makeup, you can be a costume designer if you've got a good sense of fashion and what people wear, you can be a production designer, you can be a caterer, you can be, there's so many different roles that, so you might think, oh, I want to explore that, and then you could read up about it, you could try and make a short film with your friends, or you could try and apply for a course. So there are lots of different routes, and I'm trying to help people, and I think we need now to really, really make sure that people from different backgrounds have opportunities to make film, because it's going to make for a richer industry, it's going to make for more interesting stories. I want to hear your stories, I want to see them on our screens.
That's fantastic, thank you. And the idea of lifelong learning and some of those tips, you know, whether it's watching film, reading about film, watching documentaries, even storytelling using your phone, all things that students can get involved in right now whilst they're at home. They might not be attending school at the moment. And so I think if there is something there, then, you know, having to be in school or to be able to do that isn't necessary. There's something that young people can get involved in right now, I guess, whilst they're at home, which is fantastic. And you mentioned that I think it was art and drama was some of your kind of favourite subjects at school, Sarah. Is that what really first kind of stirred your interest in film? And what kind of, was there a moment in your kind of career and in your life when you thought, film is, that's where I want to be, that's what I want to be doing?
I think the funny thing is, I was like, when I was growing up, I kept on thinking of ideas for stories. And, you know, some people would think of ideas for stories and they'd want to do a graphic novel of that idea. Some people would think of an idea and they'd want to write it as a poem, or they want to write it as a story in their diary or whatever, but my imaginings were always in the moving image. So I'd sort of sit on the bus going to school and I'd have a kind of idea for a short story, but it would be in images. So I didn't realize at the time, but I was kind of making little films in my head, you know, and that was the first stirring. But then it was seeing films, you know, by women. So I saw Jane Campion, who went on to make The Piano and various films. She made some amazing short films, and then she made a film called Sweetie, which was about a young woman growing up in Australia, and I saw that film. And then I saw a film by Meera Nair set in India called Salam Bombay, which was about street kids in India, and that was another woman film director, but from a totally different perspective. And then I saw, you know, Mike Lee's films and Ken Loach's films, which were about Britain at the time. And so all that then made me think, oh, there are stories around me I'd like to tell. But I didn't see myself as a writer. I always liked working with script writers. So I've over the years, I've always got together with a script writer and shared ideas with them, but they've written the script. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And you've worked extensively to readdress the gender balance in film telling, in film telling important female stories and working with women behind and in front of the camera. And I think your passion for increasing diversity in film and in the stories that are told has been so present in this talk so far. But what else can be done to address the kind of the gender balance in the film industry?
Yeah, so it's one of the things that when I came out of film school 19 years ago, there were that year 2% of the films that came out were made by women, and everybody was saying, oh, that's terrible. And then the next year it went up to 4%. Everybody went, oh, it's getting better. And the next year it went down to 3%, and it just kind of like trailed along the bottom in terms of women making films, a very low percentage. So, you know, 98% of the films or 94% were made by men, and I have to put in here often white men. So, you know, it clearly wasn't good. Then about 5 years ago, and I'd put a lot or even less, I'd say that there was a real sea change. And I think we're massively indebted to the women from the Me Too movement who really, really spoke out. And that led to Time's Up, and that led to lots of industries, but the film industry too, looking at itself and saying we need to address this balance. It's not gone far enough. It certainly hasn't gone far enough in terms of representing people, black people, people of colour, and that needs to go a lot further, and people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. It's got a little bit better. And on Rocks, oh, here's a picture of the girls from Rocks, and Ray Black, the singer there on the side. We really went all out to employ a female team and a team that reflected the girls on screen, so that the storytellers behind the scenes were closer to the storytellers in front of the camera. You didn't just have a lot of white men behind, and then, you know, we had young people, we had people from backgrounds close to the kids, and we you know, with the camera team, it's always male when I've worked in the past, and I've never really questioned that. And on this I said, well, how about we only meet female camera people? So we only met women, and we met some fantastic women, and we chose a woman, and actually a French woman called Helene Livart. Oh, here's some bits of script and stuff flashing on the screen. I don't know if you can all see it. So we chose a really predominantly female team. I mean, I've worked with some wonderful men of all backgrounds and ages across the time I've made films too. So I think it's all about just saying, what is this story? How can we enrich it? Let's look for people. Let's look widely. Let's not just go to the old lists of the people who've worked on every film. Let's look at who's up and coming. Let's look at, you know, and it's exciting to work with those people, and you benefit from it. So I think it's partly about that, about opening your mind up to who's out there to work with and searching them out. And also mentoring people. I do try to mentor filmmakers coming up, so that, you know, you can support people on their journey up, because it's a difficult journey and you need support.
Absolutely. I think that kind of mentorship is such a great idea. And I'm sure we'll have some questions from our students about how they might be able to find mentors in the film industry as well, which I'm sure we can get to shortly. Now we have opened the student Q&A, and we were going to ask you kind of who inspires you in your career, Sarah, and Caitlin has also asked that question as well. So is there anyone or anything in particular that has inspired you throughout your career so far?
Hi, Caitlin. Thanks for your question. So yes, I have been inspired. I mean, I think that each film I do requires different things, and then I find filmmakers who inspire me for that particular film. So if you take Rocks, for example, I watched a few films, and the team watched a few films that really inspired us. There was a film called Divines, which is on Netflix, a first-time filmmaker called Huda Benyamina. And she came from a Roma background, and she cast her sister in the film as the lead character, and it's about a friendship between two girls, and it's set in France. And I think that's a fantastic film. So she was one of my inspirations, certainly on this film. On different films, on Suffragette, I looked at much big revolutionary films. So I looked at a film called The Battle of Algiers, which is an old French film about a revolution, and that became my inspiration on that. And I would have had different inspirations on Brick Lane and This Little Life and the other films I made. But right now, I'm really inspired by young, up-and-coming female filmmakers, of which we're seeing more every day. And someone like Ava DuVernay, who's based in America, who made the documentary 13th, which was about the 13th Amendment and is all about racism really in America, and applies here too, is a real inspiration. And she made another film that is streaming now for free called Selma, which is really worth catching. So she's kind of a huge inspiration. I'm following her on Twitter, and she's my latest kind of Twitter crush. So there are lots of inspirations for me. Thank you.
That's wonderful. It was a great question from Caitlin, I must say. We have had quite a lot of questions submitted from students already, Sarah. So we'll try and interweave those into a few of the questions we had for you as well, if that's okay. One of our students here, Eden, has said, "Hi, Sarah. If you could choose any inspiring female to be the subject of your next film, who would it be and why?"
Oh, Eden, I needed preparation for that. And Eden, I saw your GCSE work, which I was delighted by. I think it was amazingly impressive, because Eden did a GCSE project and she looked at filmmakers and she wrote something about my work, which I felt very flattered by. So thank you for that, Eden. But yes, I think what woman? Well, there are so many women, aren't there? We used to play a game, Abby Morgan, the scriptwriter of Suffragette, and I, when we were going around promoting Suffragette, which was, who are the women that through history whose stories we haven't seen, and you could almost take any male character and you go, and who was the woman around at that time whose story we want to see? I mean, at the moment, I'd love to tell a story about a climate activist. There are some great ones out there from all sorts of different backgrounds around the world who have done some incredible work. I'd love to tell a story about a female artist. I mean, I'm not going to name any, because then everybody will know the next film I'm going to make. So it's a bit of a secret. But I think there are lots of incredible women. And I love those books, that are now coming out, like 100 Women You Should Know About, and all those. Those are really, really helpful, because they just shine a light on people that we should know about and we don't. Thank you, Eden.
That is a great question. One of the questions that we wanted to kind of put to you as well, and I think it's always a very, very tricky question, I know, and it might be difficult to pick one highlight, but what would you say has been for you the highlight of your career so far, or the thing that you're most proud of?
Oh, well, I mean, it's a career of highs and lows, and I think you have to get used to that. So, and that's part of the thing of getting used to people saying no. So you'll go, oh, I'm about to make this film, and then a funder will go, oh, sorry, we're not supporting you, and you'll have a big sort of down, and then you go, no, I've got to pick myself up again, and then an actor will say, yes, I want to do it, and you'll go, oh, great. I mean, I'd say that, the most recent film, which you saw the trailer of, Rocks, has been such a high, and one of the reasons it's been such a high is because I've learned so much from the young people, and so I think it's really been, I think I've learned more from them than they've learned from me. They've taught me about the world, they've taught me about their perspective, they've grown through the making of it, And, you know, like, for example, on the set of Rocks, we'd have a constant conversation about what felt truthful and what felt good. And the writers, Teresa Rococo and Claire Wilson, were on the set a lot of the time, as was this young associate director called Anu Henrique. And after every take, we'd have a conversation about what felt real. And there was one scene where I'd sort of had an idea of how it should look. And at the end of it, Kosar, who's one of the cast members, came up to me and she went, "The way you're doing the scene, Sarah, I've just got to tell you, it's dead. It's totally dead." I was like, oh. We'd been filming for a few hours, you know, and I was like, I think she's right. I think she's right. And I went back to the team and we all discussed it and we reshot it and it became much more interesting. And so, you know, that was an example of where the young person in the film made something better. It was a constant conversation and I learnt from them. So for that reason, this film has been a real high. Thank you for that question.
That was a great question, I must say, and that's really wonderful. Thank you so much. One of our students here, Esme, has asked, when you created your first film, how did it feel knowing that your dream had come true?
Oh, yeah. Well, it is that. I mean, you have a constant smile on your face, but you're also very nervous. So the first film I made that was a sort of professional film rather than a student film was a film for television called This Little Life, which was based on a story of a woman who had a premature baby. And I always call it a baptism by fire because I really, really learned so much on that film, because I'd made short films where you film for 5 days and you're filming usually with people who are your friends. And if you haven't got all the shots you want by, you know, 7 o'clock at night, you just keep going until midnight. But there I was working on a professional film. And at 7 o'clock, suddenly all the lights went off. And I was like, oh. And they went, well, yeah, you know, we've done a 12-hour day now. You know, everybody's got to go home. We're paying them with their professionals. We can't just carry on. And so that was one of the many things I learned. And also just sustaining yourself for a long period of time on a feature film is a different thing, because you've got to hold all the pieces of the story in your head. So it really was a massive learning experience for that. But I also was really delighted to be in that position of being able to sort of, you know, yeah, realize a dream. But I have to say that you're realizing a dream not on your own. You're realizing a dream and you with all the other people as well, and you're dependent on all of them in a huge way.
And that's great. I think that idea of it being a real kind of team effort to bring something so wonderful together. You mentioned before that even with your highlights of your career, there were low kind of points in your career as well. And one of our students here, Benji, has said, the film industry seems terrifying to work in. How do you deal with criticism and rejection?
Yeah, well, I think it's the hardest thing, actually. And, you know, in a way, I had to steel myself. I just had to, and practice helps. So interestingly, when I did a film course at the National Film School, they did this thing where every time you made a short film or a short project, they'd show it to everybody and then everybody would rip it apart. And, you know, they'd say, oh, I didn't like that bit and that wasn't very well done and the lighting could have been better there and the story didn't make sense there. And you started to understand that was, as a director or a filmmaker, that was your job, was to listen to that criticism and to learn from it. And that another thing that one of my fellow filmmakers said to me is, dealing with problems is actually your job. And I'd say dealing with criticism is your job too. So what happens is someone criticizes something, you think, oh yeah, they're right. Okay, so either I'm going to learn for next time, or I'm going to actually change the edit of that scene and make that, you know, use a different take and work with the editor to make this clearer, this story point. So in a way, it's essential. And when, for example, when we made Rocks, we did lots of test screenings. So we'd get in young people, the audience, and we'd show the film to them in early stages, and we'd say, what do you think? And they'd say, yeah, I really understood that character, but I didn't understand why she wanted to do that, or I didn't feel sympathy with her. So then we'd all go back to the edit and we'd say, okay, we need another moment of her looking out the window and questioning why she's doing this, or we need to change this. So in a way, it's your lifeblood. In a way, you want criticism, and you realize that you have to learn from it. And one of the other big takeaways is that making mistakes, which you're taught not to do at school, which I think is wrong, because mistakes teach you everything. I have learned more from my mistakes than I've learned from anything I've got right. So don't be afraid of making mistakes, and definitely don't be afraid of making mistakes when you're doing projects that aren't as in the public eye yet. So if you're making a film on your iPhone, you know, try things out and be prepared to show it to people and then to say that's rubbish, and go, okay, what can I do that makes it different? Be prepared for that, and you get a thick skin in the end, and that helps.
That's great. I think that's really good advice for dealing with rejection and resilience, I guess, which is something that young people, regardless of the career they enter into, will likely have to develop and face, because, you know, things won't always go as you want them to throughout life. We have a few really interesting questions here, particularly in relation to your focus on kind of ensuring diversity in the film industry. And Salma asks, what would be your advice to young people from different backgrounds trying to make it into the industry as a filmmaker or as an actress?
Okay, so well, one, I think, you know, it's always going to be a bit of a fight, and we are dealing with a film industry that traditionally has been very conservative in terms of, you know, usually taking the typical people that we know about, you know, that go into all the industries and reach the top of everything, which is usually white men. But you know what? Things are changing and people are opening up their minds, and you have to be prepared for a fight, but also find your supporters. So I always surround myself with people I trust and people I know and go to them. So there are different ways of entering the industry. You can write to people you admire. People get a lot of letters, so don't be worried if you don't get a response, but you may hit a chord with them, and you can always ask for a brief phone call to get you some advice. And they may respond. If they don't respond, don't take it personally. You can go for schemes and any competitions, and people, particularly at the moment, are looking for different voices, and rightly so. They're looking for stories about Black people and Black communities. They're looking for stories about people who haven't normally had stories told about them. So it's a good moment to look up any competitions, any schemes. I literally applied for everything. I mean, 90% of them I got turned down for. So if there was ever an advert in any kind of film magazine or film website of, oh, we're looking for entries for short films, I would send in an idea. Because it would make me discipline myself to write the idea and have more ideas. And secondly, it was a way of kind of sometimes making contacts. And sometimes even if they rejected you, they'd write back a letter saying, oh, well, why don't you apply for something else? So I think if you sort of blitz it, as my approach, you go down, you leave no stone unturned. If you're looking to be an actor, there are different ways. So you can try and do short films with your friends to show what, you know, the kind of acting that you can do. You can write to casting directors and ask if they would see you. You can try and get involved in local drama clubs. Even online, some of them are running now. But as soon as they get back, that's a really, really good way, I think. And then ask the teachers in those drama clubs how you can get into the film industry. And I would also just educate yourself, watch lots of films, see who your heroes are. Bookie, who plays Rox in our film, has been watching every Black actress she can get her hands on, reading about them, learning about their work, learning about how they got into their career, just through Googling their name and looking at interviews and YouTube clips of them talking. So that's another way. So it's a kind of a whole series of things you can do. You can set yourself little tasks. And I love the competitions because they're always like deadlines. So they'll say, submit your script by the 1st of May. And you'll go, okay, I've got a week to do it. I've got to do it. You know, and that's very useful.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you so much. And you've spoken a lot about kind of increasing diversity in film, but how can the UK film industry do more to support the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment, and to also do more to address the lack of ethnic diversity on screen?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and I think everybody needs to take a good look at themselves and a good look at their practices. I mean, there's been lots of good work done, but there needs to be massively, massively more work done. And I think what everybody's saying at the moment is so true. It's not just about, I mean, it's very good to like things on Instagram, to support in any way you can, to sign petitions, but it's also good, and it's responsibility of people like me, white people who are working in the industry, to make the changes. It's our responsibility to, one, make sure we're employing people from those backgrounds, make sure we're going out and searching for people from those backgrounds and giving them opportunities, to mentor people from those backgrounds, to look at the structures, look at the board members we're surrounded by, challenge the institutions we're involved with and say, why haven't you employed more people from those backgrounds at high levels and all levels, so that they've got influence at every level. So I think it's going to be a big approach that's needed. And I am absolutely prepared to do that work, and I think it's on my shoulders to do that work, and I have a responsibility to do it.
That's wonderful, thank you. And hopefully that's useful to one of our students here, Jude, who asked, as a white man wanting to enter the film industry, if I made it, how could I help increase diversity? And I think a few of the conversation points and suggestions there might be quite useful for Jude as well, which is fantastic. So just looking back, we've had about 260 questions submitted for you here, Sarah. So we have about 10 more minutes, so we'll try and kind of work through these as swiftly as possible. I know that in ROCS you were working with a lot of first-time actors, and Daria, one of our students here, is wondering, how often do you work with young people in your films, and how often do you work with people who are acting for the first time?
Yeah, so I have worked with people who are acting for the first time, but on the whole, I've worked with professional actors. So on Suffragette, for example, you know, Carey Mulligan and Helena Bonham Carter and Meryl Streep, they were all professional actors who'd had worked a lot and were very experienced. But on ROCS, I really set out to work with newcomers. And to work with people who didn't have, some of them hadn't even thought of an acting career. So we did a whole research process. There was a casting director called Lucy Pardee who worked with an associate called Jessica Straker. And we went into schools, we sat in the back of classrooms, we talked to young people, we invited young people to workshops, and we ran workshops over the course of a year. And it was a very different approach because these people didn't have acting techniques to fall back on. So we were kind of talking about ways of improvising and setting up scenes. So saying, OK, if you're preparing for a party, let's do a little improvisation here, and let's do it again, and sort of training them up in a way for what it would take to perform in a film. And I really enjoyed it. And there was a kind of freshness, there was an openness, and I'd like to do it again because it's great fun.
That's great. One of the most popular questions on our Q&A thread at the moment is, do you have any advice on how to pitch ideas to people in the industry and how to get noticed?
Okay, well, really good question. And it's a constant struggle. I have to say that I want you to know, even at my stage, and I've been doing this for like actually 30 years now, I still have to put a huge amount of effort into every meeting I go to convince people to make the project, and I still get turned down. So I do a lot of work. So if I'm putting together a pitch, so let's take ROCS, for example. So the producer and the creative team and I want to go to get money, to raise money for it. So what do we do? How do we raise money for it? Well, it's an unusual project because we want to evolve it with young people. So I put together a mood board of images, so of films like it. So I'll scour through the internet and Pinterest, and I'll get pictures of young people with the creative team. I'll do this that look like the young people we might have, and give a sense of what the film. And I might take images from films like The Divines or Girlhood, or films that I feel are in the world, or we feel are in the world of the film, and we'll put together a mood board. So that gives a visual sense of it. Then I'll write something called a director's statement or a creative team's statement, which will say, we would like to make a film about young people today. We imagine this film will be vibrant and tell the stories that you haven't seen before, need to see, and we write what's called a vision statement. And I'm sure you'll find examples of that if you scour the internet or look at certain books. Vision statements. Then we might put together, so we'll put together this whole package, little CVs of the creative team. So, you know, at your stage, you'd say, I've gone to school and I've studied this at GCSE, I've done extra projects. Then you could attach any little projects you've made. So if it's short film, so with my case, we'd attach the previous work I've done if people haven't seen it. So you put together this package. Then you write to people, or you get in touch, you form a team, usually is the best way for film. So it depends what role you're looking for, but always good to form a team, get together with other people. So if you're inexperienced, quite good to try and find someone who's experienced, but not necessarily. You could find another person who wants to be a producer if you're a director, and together you could say, let's write to production companies, let's look for schemes out that might be good, and then you've got your package ready to send to them. And when you go in, rehearse and rehearse in front of the mirror, in front of friends, rehearse. This is why I want to make the film. Do little role plays, do practices of, if they say, why should we make that film? You've got an answer. Who will be in the film? You've got an answer. You know, what kind of film is it? You've looked at reference films. You look like you really know your stuff. So it is a lot of hard work, I'd say, but it's all exciting and worth it. Hope that answers it.
It certainly does. Thank you so much. We have another very popular question here from Ruben. And Ruben says, you mentioned that you usually work in collaboration with a writer. Do you think being able to write as a director makes it easier to get off the ground, or does it not really matter?
I do think it's a yes and no question. I do think in some ways it does make it easier. I mean, you know, because say you have an idea, you want to make a film about a spaceship. If you want to work with a writer, you've got to convince that writer that they also want to write a film about a spaceship. Or they come to you and say, I want to write a film about my mother, and you go, yeah, I'm interested in working with you on that story. So, but if you've got a real passion, then at least you can sit down and you can have a go at it as a director, you know, a writer-director, and that's helpful. But also, there are advantages to not being a writer-director too. I think it can work well both ways. So if you're not the writer, it also gives you that other perspective, and you can bounce ideas off another person. So I think, you know, there are good things and bad things about both roles, but it's definitely good to try writing. And I think as a director, another thing I wanted to say is it's good to put yourself in every position. So I've often, before I direct, I go to acting classes in the local town hall just to remind myself what it's like to be an actor. Even though I'm a rubbish actor, just to remind myself what's useful. I sort of try to educate myself about music. I try to educate myself about art and photography and understand cameras, and so that you can understand when you're working with people, what are the parameters, what are the things they need, and how can you help?
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. We have a couple more questions here that are proving very popular with our students who are liking them in quite high numbers. Nathan has asked, hi Sarah, if you're dealing with high profile actors like Meryl Streep or Helena Bonham Carter, how do you treat them? Do you treat them like the celebrities they are, or do you treat them like normal people? A little bit of help would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Nathan, for the question. Yeah, no, I mean, my approach is that, you know, everybody is a person, and that it can be quite intimidating. And, you know, when you're working with someone like Meryl Streep, she's worked with many more people on many more films than I have. So she's, you know, you've got to respect that kind of level of experience. So, you know, you have to be respectful, one, but you have to be respectful with everybody. I think the main thing about working with actors generally is you have to understand who they are and what they need. So every actor is different. You know, it's a bit like I've got two children and they're totally different. I've got a teenage girl and an 11-year-old boy, and they're totally different and they need different things. So it's a bit like that with actors. So some actors will need you to ring them up each night and talk through the scenes that you're going to do the next day and really go into a lot of detail, and they want to meet with the writers and discuss it. Some don't want to discuss it at all, and they want to just try things and do things in front of you and see what works, and you to give little bits of feedback and not talk too much and not over explain. So in a way, I treat everybody, you know, I just treat everybody as an individual. So with Helena Bonham Carter, I'll sort of try to find out what works best for her. Is it important for her to, when she's in the makeup truck, have a little practice of the scene, or is it important for her to not do that and be left alone in her own world and own space? So it's more about that than anything else, I think.
I think that's a great tip, to kind of realize that everyone is a person and to treat people as people. And that is definitely, I think, transferable in all sectors and industries that young people might be interested in as well. And finally, time for one last question. And this is from Zach. And Zach asks, what is the one trait that you believe to be the most essential for working in the film industry?
Well, I think it very much depends on what role you want to take, because if you're an editor, you know, you've got to be prepared to have enormous patience to sit for weeks and weeks scouring through every little take. You know, on Rocks we had 150 hours of footage, lots of different versions of the scenes, lots of iPhone footage, so you've got to have enormous patience. If you're a director, you've got to be prepared to be a communicator. You've got to say, how about we try this, and bring a team together and work with people, and working with people. I'd say being a good collaborator, being respectful, being able to communicate your ideas, if you're sort of one of those, if you're in the team of a film, is probably the most important thing. And doing your homework. And knowing your stuff and being responsible and turning up on time. Those are all very important.
I think that's wonderful advice. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. A huge thank you for joining us this morning, Sarah, and for really giving us an insight into your work, what it is that motivates you and influences you, and also how our young people can get involved in film and also have an impact as well in film and in the world around them. It really is much appreciated.
Yeah, I really, really think that your generation are so exciting, and I'm really looking forward. And I think believe in yourselves, keep going. If you've got a passion, really fight for it, and you'll get there. Thank you.